Welcome to Keen on Green with Evan Rigsby, the podcast that dives deep into the world of environmental consulting from a multitude of perspectives. Join your host, Evan Rigsby, as he explores the intricate challenges and innovative solutions within the environmental sector. Whether you're a professional in the field, a student looking to make a difference, or simply a curious listener, this podcast promises to deliver interviews with experts and real-world case studies. Stay tuned as we unravel the green mysteries with Evan, one episode at a time.
Hey everybody, welcome to the newest episode of Keen on Green. Special spring episode. We were actually just talking about it now, and I can't believe it's May. You know, that flew by. Today, I have a very special guest. You know, Sarah Morgan's joining me today. She comes from a wide, and when I say wide, I mean an array of experiences. You know, I think what's interesting, I know you guys over the past few episodes have, you know, messaged me privately and been like, hey, is there somebody that has done industry and done consulting and, you know, has seen both worlds? That's Sarah, you know, and she's come from some great places. You know, she has dabbled in areas like manufacturing, chemical, all these different disciplines. Sarah, thank you for being on with us today.
I'm so happy to be invited.
So, I guess to kick it off, for those out there that don't know you, maybe just a quick blurb about yourself, and you know, we can get into some of the career stuff in a minute.
Sure, that sounds great. So, I was one of the lucky people who graduated from university around 2008 during the banking crisis, which was not a great time to begin a full-time career. But like all very happy network connection sort of people, I was hired by, at the time, Environ to do hurricane recovery work after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So I actually started my career sort of in the more commercial real estate and environmental side with environmental review records for housing and urban development, doing hurricane recovery. So I kind of moved from the Mid-Atlantic down to Louisiana. And as I was cutting my teeth on those sort of government projects, I realized that government moves a little slow, and I, by nature, do not move particularly slow. And so being with a firm like Environ that had such a strong due diligence practice, I was able to kind of get plugged in and begin with the due diligence. As I got my teeth a little bit more sunk into due diligence, a lot of risk factors came out with these ASTM phase ones, more related to compliance. So building my career there, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of compliance people, permitting, air, water, waste, chemical storage, industrial hygiene, kind of the whole gamut. And I made a point of trying to learn and actually prepare each one of those permits so that when I was doing auditing or kind of assessing risk, I actually knew what I was looking at, what I was looking for, and why I was looking for those sorts of items. I was just very, very lucky that I was in the Gulf Coast region, where we have a lot of strong compliance, a lot of strong environmental engineering people. So I kind of got a chance to learn from the best, which was wonderful. I was able to take that experience. I bounced to ERM for a little while, did some remediation work, did a little bit of health and safety, did some R&P, did some PSM, and then went back to Environ, which had by then become Ramble, continued my career, wound up with a smaller startup that was really kind of geared towards doing private equity middle market. So those mid-level portfolios, not necessarily large-scale industrial, but not necessarily the commercial real estate side of due diligence either. Those in the middle private equity guys that didn't have a lot of experience in the realm, didn't have anybody on staff that specifically did environmental work, but needed kind of an advisor. So I got on board with that startup, some of the best years of my career. As the CEO said at the time, you know, we're building the plane as we're flying it, and the opportunities that were available there for learning and for growth were really, really magnificent. So at some point in time, I went through one of those life transitions where I started to really, really think about my legacy and what I wanted to leave behind. And I heard somebody while I was out on site talking about how their corporate management system seemed to be, for lack of a better term, pigeon poop management, where the pigeon would fly in, poop all over everything, and then fly away. And I kind of got to thinking about that over and over again about, is that what I'm doing? I'm going into these places that I have no skin in this game beyond just being paid to be there and assess. And I'm telling them everything they're doing wrong, and then I'm not there for the follow-up. I don't own this. So in that thought of legacy, I wanted to really, I guess, put my money where my mouth was. And so at that time, I figured I had a broad enough experience. Let's give this a shot. Let me actually go. Let me be the person in charge. Let me go be the person who has this environmental consultant coming in, pooping all over me, and then bouncing out of here after they've told me everything I've done wrong. So I have never been accused of being humble in my career, which is both a good and a bad thing. And so I decided, why go mid-level manufacturing? Instead, I signed on to lead the environmental department of one of the largest chemical manufacturing facilities in the state of Virginia. Wow. Every permit, every program. And I said, you know what? Yeah, I can do this. This will be easy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't.
Well, I'm going to pause you there for a second. I think to go back to your first thing, I give you a lot of credit. Coming out of school, that market was not exactly rosy, with what was happening in the world. And I just to go back for a sec, what was that like? Because you moved. I mean, even some of the lifestyle changes, but that must have been crazy. Graduating and then you see the world going around you, and it's like, oh no.
It was wild. So I grew up in a very, very small town, very rural, and then I went to UVA, which is of course a large, kind of prestigious East Coast university that's not necessarily known for churning out, your technical engineering side. And when I went into school, I love animals. I want to be a veterinarian, not recognizing kind of what came with the territory of pursuing that as a career. And so about midway through college, I needed to figure out a pivot. And I was very lucky that I had a professor that sort of understood business-wise what was actually in the market. And when he and I would talk, he always called me very sparky. And he was like, I just don't see you being somebody that's going to go pursue your academic career. You're not going to be a PhD student that's just doing academic research. Have you thought about consulting? And I was like, I didn't even know that was an option. What is that? So he kind of walked me through what some possibilities were. And again, he was somebody who was in academia his entire life. So he didn't necessarily know the real world, but he just introduced it as a possibility. And from there, I began applying. Turned out through connections, because man, networking's the way to do it. The much older brother of a good friend of mine in high school wound up kind of getting my resume, and we were able to talk, and he was willing to give me a chance. And if I hadn't gotten that, I don't know if I ever would have been able to start that career. 2008 and 2009 was a great time for commercial real estate due diligence because everybody was defaulting on loans, nobody could afford it anymore. But I didn't even know that was a question I could ask, or that was a career path or a place that I could go. And a lot of people were transitioning into that space because it was keeping them employed. So honestly, for me, it was flat out luck and not quite Nepo baby, but not quite not Nepo baby. So I just encourage everybody, sometimes networking is beyond just conferences and people in the industry. It's somebody that you wouldn't have thought of from high school.
Well, I bring it up because I think there's a lot of people out there, particularly more the junior consultants, where they think, you have to kind of be in a defined box, or you graduate and then you got to go into the right bucket, and stuff. But there's so many leaders like yourself that I met where it's like there's parts of it where you do kind of fall into it and you figure out a lot of the rest of it along the way. It's not like you need to know everything,
I mean, that is absolutely correct. Again, I didn't know that consulting was a career. I didn't know that merger and acquisition due diligence was a career path. I didn't realize that there was even an environmental kind of side to that. As far as the liability went, when I thought of environmental when I was still in school, it was wetlands, animals, ecology. That's sort of where my brain was focused. I knew the EPA existed. I understood that there were air permits. But when you're learning environmental science, it's not necessarily you're learning how to administer an air permit. You don't really read them. You understand that the Clean Water Act exists. Have you ever read a NIPD's permit? That's not necessarily going to come up. And through the due diligence, and again, I by nature have a very yes and personality. So once I got my foot in the door and I recognized that this was not only a career, but there were so many subsets to the career, why not explore? Why not try to figure that out? And I was, again, very lucky to have the opportunity to do so. But part of that was just sticking my head around the corner and just being available. And I can't say I necessarily had an overarching plan for my career at any point in time, but sometimes you fall in the hole and there you are.
And then the roller coaster starts.
Yep.
And then the roller coaster starts. Well, I think, too, you mentioned your professor. And I think I'm just a big believer of, like, mentors, whether it's in school or work or wherever. Mentors could be a lot of things. I mean, are there other, I'm sure you have dozens, but, like, are there any other mentors that you want to mention or along the way that have been, like, super helpful for you, and all that?
Absolutely. So again, I was lucky where I was working in firms that had a massive amount of bench depth, both nationally and internationally. And I found mentors whether they wanted to be found or not. And a lot of the times for me, that happened with just a well-timed joke or really letting somebody see my personality. And I found one at each firm, and I've actually been able to keep in touch with all of them, which has been wonderful, except for one who unfortunately did pass away. Me and the Ouija board, though, we're still trying. So I just had some really wonderful mentors in my past, and one of the things that they really taught me was, especially in environmental, especially in consulting, which is a very kind of self-entrepreneurial career, being genuine and having a personality are extremely helpful. And so all of these people that I kind of wound up partnering with and being my mentors were definitely not your kind of typical engineering personalities. They often were kind of loud, kind of broad, and kind of out there. But one of the things they really taught me and spoke to quite specifically was, it's not always best to be the smartest person in the room. Sometimes being the most likable person is really what's going to get you the farthest. So I've always taken that to heart, and they showed me through example that can be true. And again, just being genuine, especially when you're interacting with clients, it just rings a lot more true to everyone. Also, it's a lot more fun for me, so I'm going to always take it and run there. But it's very, very important in every career to have someone who will go to bat for you when you're not in the room, who kind of knows you soup to nuts, knows your experience, knows what you like, knows what you're good at. And that way, when you're not in the room in those leadership decisions, they're able to kind of slot you into those things.
Well, I think you said something that I definitely clicked with, where you were talking about you need to be able to communicate, whether it's consulting or industry, it doesn't matter. But, we've kind of talked offline about it. There's a lot of smart people in our industry, but not everyone gets the social part. And, I think that's one thing that I've always admired with you, is that you do have a really good personality. You can read those, the emotional IQ. You're also dealing with, especially on the consulting side too, you were dealing with a lot of different groups, investors, legal people, other consultants, your own team. What was that like, or even now, what's it like in general, like to work with that many? You have some technical people, you have some non-technical people. How do you keep your sanity?
That's a good question. I don't know that I actually have. Is this all a hallucination? We don't know. But one of the things, I've naturally always been a big fan of code switching, and that's used in a variety of ways. But in this particular case, it's I don't even want to say it's necessarily understanding your audience, but a lot of what I've kind of tried to develop and work through is jargon parroting. And that's, I guess, a technical term for it, where if somebody uses a piece of jargon and you can pick up in context what that means, if you parrot it back at them, they're naturally going to respond to you more. It's going to give you a sense of authority that you wouldn't necessarily have otherwise if you were, say, if I'm talking to another environmental consultant, using remediation terms, using those airhead words of like NACs and that sort of thing. They're automatically going to give you a lot more credence than you would if you were not able to keep up on that way. So understanding the difference between who you're speaking with is always a difficult task. Speaking to an attorney is going to be extremely different than speaking to a plant manager. It's going to be extremely different than speaking to a finance person. It's going to be different than speaking to an engineer. So being able to kind of switch it up humor-wise as well has been really helpful for disarming people. And as a consultant, both on the auditing side as well as the presentation side, having somebody who's a little bit more vulnerable and open to your talking, humor is a great way to disarm and kind of get that vulnerability, in my experience. When I was asked at the startup that I started working for, the CEO and I were friends, and he was one of those mentors that I will always keep in touch with, and just a wonderful business-minded individual. He asked me to try to create some kind of curriculum to explain code switching. And what we actually wound up settling on was there are some online courses about attorneys doing depositions. And when an attorney does a deposition, they're trying to get information often out of somebody who doesn't want to give it. And there are a lot of tips and tricks for how to adjust your attitude, adjust your language, body language, everything else, that really do come in handy for consulting and for communicating at all levels. And I will say in consulting and due diligence in particular, you're often not speaking to somebody who has a strong technical environmental depth. And so understanding what it is that they want to know is step one, and then being able to speak in the language that they're going to be able to understand. So liability risk for attorneys, what's this going to cost you for a plant manager or a CFO? Or an engineer, here's the data, and here's a graph. All of those things are pretty easy to identify right off the bat using attorney deposition tricks. And so those were really helpful tools that I was kind of able to pick up on and learn. And I had absorbed at some point in my life prior to recognizing that there were real tutorials for it.
Well, it's kind of funny because even some of the principals I talk with, and it's like, Evan, we went to school to be geologists and engineers. I was never taught to be a business person. And, but what's interesting, even your professor or even the CEO there, you've kind of had a foot in the door of kind of learning the business of it. And was that weird at first to you? Because like a lot of the consultants I talk with, they're like, we were never taught this,
As somebody who can't balance their own personal checkbook, trying to understand what EBITDA and net profit and net loss and multipliers was, the first few years, it was definitely nodding my head and being like, yeah, money's important. Yeah, I get it.
Totally agree.
You're super right. And then as I dig more and more into it, especially again working with a startup, when we have 20 people, profit matters. But how do you make profit? Every single person has to be a seller doer. Here's your EBITDA. And I'm like, all right, okay, I'm finally going to ask the question, what's a beta? And from there, having them sort of explain the business side to me was extremely useful. Not necessarily on the technical aspects, but actually being able to sell myself internally. And whenever I used to interview, especially people who were straight out of school for consulting, one of the things that I always spoke to was it's an entrepreneurial business, even if you're working for someone else, because you are selling yourself as a product. You are selling your knowledge as a product, as an individual. So if you are going to be in a room by yourself, you are selling yourself as an expert. And it has to kind of run the gamut, because if your private equity client is going to ask you, like, well, what's my return on investment going to be? What is the cost of this? Well, all right, I've got to be able to actually explain to you the cost of remediation and why it's required beyond just, well, you have to. So that and getting that background was extremely useful in a lot of ways. I still can't balance my own checkbook, but you know what? That's fine. I understand a little bit better how private equity works, and it served me very, very well in my role at the plant and in operations, because unfortunately, an industrial checkbook works exactly like a personal one. If the money's not there, how do we balance? How do we do the right thing while making improvements, while knowing what's coming down the road? And when my CEO is doing town halls and is talking about EBITDA and all these things, being able to understand, okay, this is the state of our company. How can I adjust my strategy to be able to meet those needs without just having to wave my hand like a turkey and be like, but we have to. Okay, there's other ways to sell this. And so that was extremely helpful, as well as when they did eventually start moving me into sales and conference presentations and things and consulting. You know, I needed to know what I was selling and why I was selling it from a financial perspective. So again, part of that is the yes and in my personality. If somebody starts asking or telling me things that I don't necessarily know, pick up what I can from context, and from there I'm going to start asking questions. If I ask too many questions, normally then they'll suggest a book I have to read, and then I'll read that book and come back with more questions.
Well, no, I agree with you, and I think you can never ask enough, and I think you can regret more by saying nothing. And, you know, and I mean, even the recruiters we bring here, it's like, you know, when I'm hiring, it's you're selling yourself. You know, same what you just kind of said. It's Sarah Inc., you know, and that sort of thing. What are your thoughts on the environmental market, you know, for 2026 on? And, you know, the big question there, you kind of saw it from 08, 09. You've been through ups and downs. You know, what's your take, you know, for kind of the market right now, and what you kind of see, where you see it going?
So that's a really interesting question, because as we, I think, all are aware, there's just a lot of transition and interesting things happening in the government. And so they're often the ones that are going to be giving the laws. They're sort of the ones who tell us what we do and don't have to implement. And in certain markets with sustainability and everything else, those are often sort of doing the best or going above and beyond. And then we did have a period where sustainability was sort of a requirement that's been walked back a little bit. But keeping that momentum with your clients of, hey, sustainability does still matter. Hey, look at your sustainability is actually reducing your overhead cost. You kind of are able to stay in the market a little bit more in that way by explaining the finances of, it's not just doing it because you have to, but look how much you saved on waste this year because somebody actually looked at it a little bit harder.
Right.
So there's definitely some of that going on, especially when the markets are a little bit volatile, as we'll just kind of say with a wink and nod about that. Commercial real estate due diligence and sort of merger and acquisition, private equity due diligence have a definite balance, a back and forth. So in times like these, you might see a little bit more of the commercial real estate side because people are refinancing, people are getting different loan terms to try to be able to afford leases and that sort of thing. Whereas when there's more money in the free market, you're going to see people purchasing other companies and trying to kind of increase their stock. So right now, pipelines, importers, everyone else, that's going gangbusters. I'm seeing it in the feedstocks and the chemicals that I'm bringing in right now. Wow, they are profiting. They are profiting greatly at this particular moment. And just trying to be able to recognize some of those market trends and go after where you know the money is actually coming in is really kind of where you want to focus. Oil and gas is a very, very typical boom and bust cycle. Everybody who works in the oil and gas space understands and knows that. But, you know, you gotta get it while the getting's good, as they say in Texas, maybe? I made that up.
I was just about to say, we're doing some work in Texas in that area, so I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yeah, Get it while the money's there.
And, I think you said it perfectly, being able to recognize that. Where is it? Where's the up? Where's the down? And I think I have one last question for you, but I think if I got one big thing from what you were talking about, it's you have to self-advocate. You have to speak up. You have to ask that question if you don't understand. And I guess for more of the junior watchers that are kind of listening to this and they're trying to break through, any final thoughts there? Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a conference, or, because I get the question so many times, Evan, I don't know anyone. I don't know anyone, I'm not connected. And I think you're a shining example of just start, just reach out. Any last thoughts there, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one of the big organizations that I'm a huge proponent of and have really enjoyed is the Environmental Bankers Association, which is an industry group that's definitely focused more on your commercial real estate side. But there are a lot of really great people who have done a lot of really interesting things, both in the banking industry and outside of it. And they now have a qualification course for environmental risk in the commercial real estate space. And networking with those folks, because it's going to be your larger banking clients, really connected me to a lot of other people. And I will say my first big sales win actually came from going to an Environmental Bankers Association conference. And I had some work to do, so I was not in a particular session. It wound up that I had accidentally hoarded all of the electrical outlets in this particular corner, and someone from one of the big banks needed to plug in their laptop. They came and asked, and I said, we've been trying to get on your approved vendors list for a while. Ta-da! That's really all it took, is literally holding the power. So yeah. There's nothing to be lost from just asking in a casual way. It's not embarrassing to be told no in that sort of circumstance. And again, it's all about branding and just be likable. Be somebody wants to work with. And even in industry, I need my operators to come to me to tell me something's going on. If I'm not going to punish them, they're going to like me better. So they'll come to me automatically.
Well, you made me smile with the power thing, and first of all, I could just imagine a heat map camera with all the outlets in there. But no, same thing happened to me. One of my first clients, I was at a coffee shop because I was working remotely, and I'm Mr. Clumsy. I almost spilled on the guy my coffee, and I'm getting napkins, and then I'm like, "Where are you from?" And then it was another consulting firm, and I don't care what religion someone is or what someone believes in, but that was like a universal, weird, statistical moment. And that was kind of the same with you.
Yeah. And it's just, I was in the right place at the right time, but you have to capitalize on those. They don't just, right. They kind of just happen, but they don't just happen.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, that's it, everybody. That's it. And if you want a client, go to a conference, jam all the outlets, and you got to win.
Exactly. Sales strategy. There it is.
But on a serious note, Sarah, thank you. Thank you. If it's okay with you, can I tag your LinkedIn if anybody wanted to reach out after watching this?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we were trying to aim to talk about the differences between consulting and actually heavy industry, and whoops, I'm a yapper, so we didn't get to it. But if anybody has questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm a yapper, so you might get more than you bargained for.
Hey, I love it. Lots of great content, guys. It'll be in the bio. Sarah, thanks again, and that's a wrap.
Thanks so much.